Joshua chapter 4. Joshua chapter 4. That's where we'll be again this Sunday. Todd, you did a great job teaching her how to sing, man. You did a great job. Just want to let you know. I've entitled this message once again today, and as we looked at last week, Remembering 2018. Remembering 2018. And as we're here for the first time in 2019 meeting on a Sunday morning, I want us just to understand that there's some things that we can control and there's some things that we cannot control. And the premise of the message today will be understanding that God is in control of the things that we believe that are uncontrollable. We can't control what people think about us. We can't control what people say about us. We can't control what other people do. But understand this, that I know that I serve someone that is bigger than anyone else of this world. And that I know that He is in control of each and every one of us. And I believe that. Just as Andrew is saying this morning, do you believe that He is in control? Remembering 2018, Joshua chapter 4, verse number 1, it says, "When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, Take 12 men from the people from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the people of Israel. And this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, What do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And the people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. For the priests bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people passed over in haste. And when all the people had finished passing over the ark of the Lord, and the priest passed over before the people." As we move into this section of Scripture, number 2 sermon that we started last week, as we look at number 2, same Scripture, I'm reminded of something that I read this week, just talking about mindset and understanding that we cannot control what other people control. And I believe that the greatest president of every one of our lives, Ronald Reagan, I believe that just by reading things of him, I know in my lifetime, I was born in 1984, so he was at the end of his presidency getting there. But anyway, I believe that we can learn a lot from Ronald Reagan, and I'm reminded of a conversation that I read that this past week that he had with one of his staff members one time, talking about what people think and controlling what other people think. He said they were discussing the highs and lows of the presidency, and it said right after the attempt of the assassination on Reagan's life, that some of you recall, his ratings were about 90%. Okay? Just a year later, just to show you how crazy people are. Thank God Facebook wasn't around back then. Amen? I knew I'd get an amen for that. Just a year later, in the midst of the recession of 1982, his numbers, they plummeted. And it says that the staff member recalls going back into a meeting with Reagan, and remembers Ronald Reagan telling him, says, he asked him, how are they? Well, how are they? What is it? How are the numbers? What do the figures look like? And the staffer replied, well, they're pretty bad. The president responded, he said, "What does pretty bad mean?" The staffer answered him once again. He said, "President, they're about 32%. 365 days later, the next year, they're down from 90% to 32%. But then this is what the president said. He said, the president, he responded with a smile on his face. He said, "Don't worry, I'll just go back out there and get shot again." You know, the president, and then after he said, "I'll just go out there and get shot again," he went on with his daily routine, went out for his daily briefing. You know, the point that I'm bringing to your attention today is that Reagan, I believe, that he lived by, that he knew that he could not control what other people thought. He couldn't control what people were thinking about him. He couldn't control the things that others do, but he did understand that he could control how he responded to problems that were staring him right in the face. He couldn't control what other people were thinking, but he could control how he responded and how he reacted to these. And as we move forward in this year, let us be reminded that there are things that will come up in our life. There will be those days and these dates that come up in our life that we cannot control. Things that happened in 2018, things that happened in 2017, things that happened in 2016, 2015, it goes on and on and on. Guess what? We cannot control what happened on those days. We can't. But we can control how we respond to these good and bad situations that will roll around once again. And they will stare us in the face here in 2019. But as this year unfolds, God will bring you to a crisis of belief. He will bring you to a place in your life that you'll have to decide, how am I going to respond to this date that comes around every year? Am I going to walk by faith, or am I going to walk by sight? Am I going to think that God, He can't provide for me? The God that I serve, He's not big enough to overcome this date that's going to come up in my life. Maybe things are going so well in our life that we don't think that we need God. That's a very scary place to be, when we think that everything's just going perfect and we don't need any help from the Lord. That's when we fall flat on our face, and the Lord has a way of humbling us when that happens. But I want us to revisit this text that I started last week, just looking at the children of Israel, and understand that they're on the cusp of claiming something that was promised to them years ago, years before that these people are even thought of, that God promised them, and they're on the cusp of crossing over the Jordan and claiming something that's been promised them for years. And understand that Joshua, and remember this morning, that Joshua, he cannot make the children of Israel pass over the Jordan. He can't. And the reason I say that is this. Think about this. If Joshua could control their thought process, if he can control what they did, don't you think that Moses would have done that 40 years ago? Yeah, I think if Joshua could control them, then Moses should be able to control them. And I believe that Moses, instead of wandering around for 40 years, I believe that he would have said, "Listen, we're going. It doesn't matter what you say, but we're going over." So we know that Joshua, he cannot control what other people think. He cannot control them. He can give them suggestions, just like Moses did. But he cannot control what they do. And the same thing is true about me and anybody else. If you get advice from anybody else, I can sit here and I can preach till I'm red in the face and keep you till 1 o'clock one day. If y'all want to try to do that, we can. Y'all didn't laugh, so we're going to try it then. Not today. I won't tell you when it is, because nobody will show up. So I can sit here until I'm preach till I'm red in the face and tell you to do this, do this, do this. Other people can tell you, coaches can tell you to do this. Your employees, they can tell you, say, do this, do this, do this. But until you come to the place in your life saying, "Look, I can do this, and I'm going to do it," then guess what? What I'm doing is in vain. And what God continues to put in front of you really is in vain, because we're not trusting in what He's saying. We're just trusting in what we're thinking. It's scary to think about our thought process, that we think that we're in control more than God is. So understand this morning that Joshua, he cannot control what they're doing. But what makes this time different? Why is this time different, Bryan? Why are they finally fixing to pass over? Why is this generation, why is this group of people finally going to take the step that nobody else could before up to this time? Well, I believe that the answer is found in Joshua chapter 3, verse number 5. Joshua chapter 3, verse number 5. It says that when Joshua said to the people, "Consecrate yourself, For tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. That's what he tells us. I believe that it starts right there. Before the 24 hours before they're going to pass over the Jordan, 24 hours before chapter 4 even comes into play, chapter 4, verse number 5, before that comes into play, Joshua's saying, listen, consecrate yourself because tomorrow God's fixing to do something that you can't even explain. They didn't know what that meant, but they did it. See, consecration, being consecrated means to set apart from, means to be set apart from. In a biblical sense, it means stepping away from everything where it is only you and God, no distractions at all. You know, one good example, I believe, is found in Exodus chapter 33, verse number 7. And we're going to look at this a little bit deeper tonight, but I want you to notice the scripture with me. And this is a picture of consecrating. It means to set apart, to get away from, stepping away from everything where it's only you and God. Notice what the tabernacle of meeting, the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, notice what Moses did with it when he set it up. Exodus 33:7, it says, now Moses used to take the ark and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp. And he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. It means they consecrated themselves. They didn't put it right in the middle, but they put it in a place where it's just them and God, where they could get along with God. So consecrating ourselves before the Lord is a picture of that. It means just to get away where it's you and Him. And you know, I'm always a little skeptic when I hear someone say that, you know, my prayer time is on my way. Is on my way to work in the morning. That's good. I'm glad that you're praying. But I hope that your 100% of your concentration is not on the Lord at that time. And everybody else on the road at that time hopes that your concentration, 100% of it, is not on the Lord. I think that God's going to give us, He'll give us He gives a mulligan on that one, I promise. But because we're not really consecrated. We might be concentrating a little bit, but we're not consecrated. We're not just putting our thought process, all of it in it. We need to get to a place where it's just us and God. And that we stay away from no distractions. And we put our trust in God. And that's what these people did. Joshua said, look, consecrate yourself. Get away. Get away. And they didn't know. They knew that passing the Jordan was the ultimate prize. But they didn't know. Joshua 3:5. They didn't know what that actually meant. They didn't know. Just consecrate yourself. Get along with the Lord. Trust what Joshua, the leader, is saying. Trust in that. Trust that He's not going to lead you astray. And trust in that God's going to do something amazing in your life. This morning, I want to tell you, consecrate yourself. And if you consecrate yourself in 2019, I promise you, Joshua chapter 3, verse number 5, will come alive to you like never before. God will do something amazing in your life. You might not think it's amazing at the time. And that's what we're going to look at here in a second. You might not think it's amazing at the time, but as it unfolds, you will see how beautiful God's love actually is. So the question is, how are you going to remember these dates? Remembering 2018 might have been the first. How are you going to remember this when 2019 rolls around? When that day rolls around, what are we going to think? So that's what I want to challenge you with this morning. And last week we looked at these two things. Last week we looked at one, and I want to look at another one today. And last week we looked at our past events. They serve as a helpful reminder to us personally. They can serve as a helpful reminder to us personally. But here's the thing I want to look at this morning. This we're going to look at today and then look at it a little bit deeper tonight. Is our past events, they can serve as a helpful resource for others in the present. They can be resources for others in the present. That our past events, they can be helpful resources for others in the present. Our past events, the children of Israel, it was a failure up to this point. But it can be that failure can be a helpful resource for them in the present, right now, what's going on. Joshua chapter 4. See, our past events, they can serve as helpful resources for others in the present. That's found in verses 2 through 7. Now, I want to summarize that for you as we look at this. You know, he talks, and understand that Joshua chapter 2, or Joshua chapter 4, verses 2 through 4, that is commands that are given to Joshua. This can be a very wordy section of Scripture. Joshua chapter 4, verses 2 through 4 is commands that are given to Joshua that Joshua is supposed to relay to the children of Israel. And then we see in verse number 5 of Joshua 4 that Joshua says to them, pass over. So Joshua is he didn't know why they were supposed to be consecrating themselves. Joshua chapter 3, verse number 5. Consecrate yourself before the Lord because God's going to do something amazing in front of us. When they do that, God appears to them. Joshua receives commands from the Lord. And when everybody is consecrated, they receive commands from the Lord. And Joshua gets them, verses 2 through 4 of Joshua 4. And then in Joshua chapter 4, verse number 5, it says that Joshua relays the message to the children of Israel. And so the commands are 2 through 4, what's going to happen if the children of Israel finally listen to what Joshua is telling them. Joshua chapter 4, verse number 5. So these can be helpful, our past events can be helpful resources in the present. Now, what do you mean by that, Bryan? How can failures be helpful resources for others in the present? Places where I have failed, places where we have missed it. How can that be a success? How can a failure be a success today? Well, I want to show you how the failures of the past were a helpful resource for these people right here in Joshua chapter 4. You see, up to this point, all their life, the children of Israel, all they have heard from their parents and their grandparents is that they've missed the greatest blessing that God had in store for them, and it was passing over the Jordan. That's what they've heard. This generation has heard that their entire life. We know that just because that's reality. And when time rolled around for Israel to pass over, up to this point, they've missed it. They've missed it. They were worried about what they were seeing. They were not worried about what God was giving them. And this new generation, this generation that Joshua is talking to right here in Joshua 4, this new generation has the opportunity to succeed where others have failed in the past. They have the opportunity to succeed where others have failed in the past. So the question is, why did they succeed? It goes back to Joshua chapter 3, verse number 5. They consecrated themselves. They got along with the Lord and they searched Him. And not only did they search Him, remember it's a mental thing, and then they did a physical thing. The mental was happening all the way up to verse number 5 of Joshua 4, 5. And then it turned into a physical passing. God might have you in that mental stage from Joshua 3, 5 to Joshua 4, 4. That you know what God is telling you to do. You know where God is leading this church. You know that. And God has you on the cusp of passing over into a promised land that He's promised to you, whatever it is. And He's sitting there and he's telling you, He said, listen, if you just trust me, this one time, trust me, I'm going to do great things in front of you. We have to move from the mental to the physical, and that's what they do in chapter 4, verse number 5, that they finally move over and they move into a physical. So the past events of failure that Joshua had already encountered, we can see this in Numbers chapter 14, verse number 30. Jot that down. It might be in your bulletin, but understand that Joshua, he has seen this, and it's been failure. Where they are right now in their life, it has been a failure every time up to this point. And this is what it says in Numbers 14:30. It says, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. You remember, they were the only two from the generation before that said, yes, we can claim this. Yes, we will take this. And so everybody else dies off except Joshua and Caleb. And so the point that I'm making this morning is this, How does it relate to me, Bryan? How does this history lesson, in a sense, relate to me? We have the ability, you have the ability, just like Joshua did years ago, to be able to use our past experiences, good or bad, to be helpful resources in the present here in 2019. You have the ability to come and look people in the eye where they are saying it cannot be done, and you can say that it can be done, and I believe that God will do it. You have that ability. When someone says that God can't do it, you have the ability to say, yes, I know that He can do it because He's done it before. Because of Joshua's past events, his past events, his faithfulness, saying that God, we can do it. Everybody else is saying that we can, but Joshua and Caleb are saying that God, you can do it, and I'm going to trust in that. Because of that, because of his past events, it was a helpful resource for the people in the present right here of the children of Israel. Understand this morning that the children of Israel might not have passed over if it wasn't for Joshua. And it might not have happened if it wasn't because of those past failures. He had the ability to look there and say, guys, listen, I've seen it with my own eyes. I've looked at it. We can be reminded of what Abraham, our father, years ago told us that we can, that God's promises. I've actually walked over there. Me and Caleb, we have walked over there, guys, and I'm telling you that I know that everybody else didn't believe it could happen, but I promise you it can happen. See, the past events that were equal to failures in the past, up to this point, Joshua is saying, listen, they don't have to be failures, but they can be successes. So do you see how past events, where it might be a failure in everybody's life, in their eyes, past events, they can be helpful resources in the present. The places where you feel like you have failed in the past, understand that it can be the helpful resources that someone might need today. How great does it make us feel that when we're going through a hard time, that someone they can call us, they can send us a text, they can just put their arm around and say, listen, I've been there before. I know exactly what you're going through. It's tough. We might not like that, but man, those are the most comforting words that we can hear from someone. Past events can be helpful resources for somebody right now. And they might be failures in their eyes, but it can be a success in their eyes. Now, this whole group of people, this new generation, they're on the cusp of passing over something that is never done before. Passing the Jordan has been a failure up to this point. It's always been equated with failure. And the point this morning, and the point is that I'm trying to make you understand, is that we have the ability to mold the next generation's mindset. We have the ability to mold the next generation's mindset. And the question is, it tells us in Joshua chapter 4, verse number 6, it says that at the end of it, it says, these things will be a sign unto you. But then it says, at the end, it says, your children will ask you in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? What do they mean to you? What do those past events mean to you? What does this date mean to you? At that point, because obviously the next generation doesn't know what it means, you have the ability to mold and to craft their thought process, their perception of something at that point. It might not be a stone, it could be a date, it could be a place, whatever it is, but you have the ability to say, when they ask you, what does this mean? Is it going to be a negative response, or is it going to be a positive response? And understand that the passing over the Jordan has been a failure up to this point, but that's not what God intended for it to be. It was a promise that He gave Abraham years ago. So this is supposed to be a blessing, but it's been a failure. It's been a burden. It's saying that we cannot do it up to this point. And I want to ask you this. Why would we want to ruin something that God intended to be a blessing just because it didn't go our way? Have you ever thought about that? Why would we want to ruin something that God intended for it to be a blessing for someone else. We might have thought that past failures might mean victories for people coming after us. These past failures, they might mean victory for others. And the thing is that I want you to notice in this text, and we'll look at it later on tonight, is that up to this point, these commands in verses 4 through 7, it's for the present generation of Joshua chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. These commands are there for the present generation that Joshua relays to the children of Israel, and he never mentions anything about the past, but only mentions from this point forward moving on. As you read that, he never refers back to, and even back in Joshua chapter 3, he never mentions about where they fell. He doesn't mention any negativity. He doesn't mention anything about that. He just says, look, don't worry. It's like, don't worry about the past, because we can't do anything about it. We can't control what people have said. We can't control what people think. We can't do that. We cannot control what's behind us, so let's not worry about it. But from this point forward, let's move on and let's do what we can do. Let's not focus on where we failed, but let's focus on where we can succeed. Joshua never mentions that's saying about his past failures. It's in his mind, but he doesn't want to mold and make their thinking that this is going to be a failure for them. But he's saying to them, even as tough as it was, and you know that there were people that Joshua loved that were with them, and they were saying that we cannot do this, we can't do it, we can't trust what Moses is saying. And you know that bothered Joshua when he had to go back and see all these people, and they ended up dying, and they didn't receive the ultimate blessing that God had for them. You know that hurt Joshua. But he didn't get bitter. But he just put his trust in God. And where this failure has been, he doesn't mention it to them. But he's just saying, listen, we can make this bad thing a good thing. And what Joshua is saying is that he's saying that from this point forward, the promised land will never be referred to as a failure or what might have been. He's saying from this point forward, it will have a new meaning to the message. That God and God alone can do the impossible. Where others say it cannot be done, God and God alone is saying that it can be done. He doesn't refer to the past, but he's saying from this point forward, it will not be a failure, but it will be a success. From this point forward, the first Sunday of 2019, are we finally, as a church, going to put these burdens, these failures of the past behind us and move forward with God and say, God, yes, it can be done here? Or are we going to continue to say, it cannot be done, and will another generation die on the other side of all the blessings that God has in store for us? That's the question. From this point forward, it has the ability to be a new message, a new meaning for future generations. And that's what Joshua is saying. Don't worry about the past. What is it going to mean from us forward? What is it going to mean to you personally? What is it going to mean to your family? What is it going to mean to your church? What's it going to mean to your community? What is it going to mean to your workplace when that date rolls around? I think that Joshua wishes that this generation was already on the other side. He wishes that the first generation made. You can close your Bibles. We're done. But he didn't allow the past failures, the thought process of this has been a failure, and man, I hope that this generation doesn't miss it as well. He didn't allow all the bad things to control his thought process, and he didn't allow all the bad things of the past to be filtered into their thought process and say, and in return, that this generation thought that it couldn't be done as well. But the only thing that he did was he put life into them. He put positive thoughts into there, saying that we can do this, but we got to consecrate ourselves before the Lord. We got to put our trust in Him. The best way to illustrate this for you is that It's a personal thought that I was thinking about this past week as I was getting ready for this sermon, and never really put it into an illustration. But Thomasville, Alabama, it's a place where my father grew up until he was 14 years old. Thomasville, Alabama is a place that has a whole different meaning from my father than it does from me. You see, when my dad was 14 years old, his mother had a brain aneurysm, and she passed away in his arms at age 14. At age 15, his father was an alcoholic, and at age 15, on Halloween night, his father went down to collect some rent money from a rental property that they had from a man that worked with them on the farm in Thomasville, and my grandfather murdered on their own land in their own house that they owned, a rental property. My father and his two sisters, they moved to Mobile, Alabama, and was finished being raised with an aunt and uncle of ours, and lived there until they graduated high school. But Thomasville, Alabama, and the old Burge place is what it's called to everybody in Thomasville. It was a deep and a dark place for my father. It always has been, and understandably so. In Thomasville, Alabama, it has a whole different meaning to my father than it does for me. You see, my aunt and uncle, about 20 years ago now, they decided to move from Mobile back to Thomasville, and they tore down the old Burge place, and they built a house on Midway Road in Thomasville where the old Burge place was, and they've lived there up to now, and even though that his sister moved back and they lived there, it's still been tough for my father to go back and visit Thomasville, and always has been to a certain extent until recently. And see, it has a totally different meaning for me. You see, that same place, that same property that meant so many bad things to him, it means something totally different to me. You see, it's a place that I was taught how to hunt on, sort of, how to hunt. You know, I was able to kill a 9-point buck that I have mounted. That was the first thing that Chelsea took down when we got married. But I was able to kill that buck there and enjoyed it, and got close to my aunt and uncle and their two kids. You know, it was a place that I caught a big largemouth bass out of that ended up getting mounted. It was a place that I was able to move back to and live with my aunt and uncle and start college. It's a place where my cousin, the son of my aunt that moved back, her son found his wife there, and they surrendered to the ministry, and now they're in the ministry. And the thoughts and the perception of Thomasville is totally different than what it is for me and what it is for my father. But here's the point. I would have never been able to experience Thomasville like I have unless my dad had the attitude like Joshua. If he would have said, this is a place that I'm not going to return back to, it's not a place that I want anything to do with, that it's a place of failure, it's a place of deep and dark depression that I don't want anything to do with. If he would have had that kind of mindset, guess what? The next generation would have never reaped the benefits that I did. So the question that I want to have, that I leave you this morning, is this. Are you ready to go back to that deep, dark place? And are you ready to mold and make this next generation a place of blessing and not a burden? How are you molding and making the next generation's thought process? It all lays at your feet. What I'm going to do in my family, in my church, in my workplace, it's up to you. Father, we thank you for your word today. God, I pray that we will be obedient to what your word says. Lord, I pray that places that we might struggle with, God, that they're not a burden to us, but Lord, that they're a blessing. And Lord, that we will not carry on these burdens to the generation that's in front of us right now, but God, we will use them as a blessing. See, the things that you have given us they're not a burden, but Lord, they're a promise. They're to be a blessing if we will just take them. Lord, it means letting go and trusting you. So Lord, I pray that 2019 will be a place, from now on, will be a place of blessings and not a burden. In Jesus' name, amen.